Oh, hold on. Weren't you about to do something interesting there and make a bigger meta commentary on the nature of what it means to cooperate?
Trad waifu. Trad waifu. It's always been trad waifu. It will always be trad waifu. We will only have trad waifu.
Hello. That's just going to be my thing from now on.
I guess it is.
I am Raghava. My pronouns are them, theirs.
And I'm Mo, he, him, his.
And welcome, or perhaps even better, welcome back to the Critical Weeb Theory podcast. The first and foremost podcast made by Mo Black and Raghava.
That kind of makes it sound like we have more podcasts. So where are the podcasts? Where are the hidden podcasts? I've planted 3 podcasts around the city, and you have 1 hour to defuse them all. Wait, is podcasting just capitalism monetizing our conversations?
Shit. I'm going to leave that in. Leave that in. That's really good. Yeah, so welcome to the Critical Weeb Theory podcast, the podcast that aims to put all the politics in all the anime. We have a brand new podcast, and you know what you're supposed to do with brand new podcasts?
Talk about cool shit?
I was going to say talk about something that only we have ever been interested in, and that is not popular at all.
Oh, yes, definitely. That will be great for the algorithm. Let's do it.
Darwin's Game is a winter 2020 anime.
Remember that? It was like right before the world started,
It aired I think it did in fact finish airing before COVID became a real thing, which feels like an eternity ago, aside from being an anime that released before the world started to end, or rather, before everyone realized that the world was in the process of ending for the past, since capitalism was invented.
Darn.
That's another lame joke I have to keep in there. Darwin's Game is a show that stars Kaname Sudo.
He's like an average high schooler, right?
He's a high schooler on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And it features this thing called Darwin's Game, a game people play from their mobile phones that involves a bunch of children killing each other.
It's like if you could download Hunger Games on the App Store.
Yeah, and at base, I don't think that's entirely a novel concept. Mm-hmm. But the other thing Darwin's Game is sometimes is about social Darwinism. It's in the title. And
right.
When Darwin's Game is good, it is talking about how competition is bullshit, survival of the fittest is not how that goes, and actually it's better if we cooperate instead of resorting to quote-unquote law of the jungle type. We should all be at each other's throats. Mm-hmm. And when Darwin's Game is that show, it's really good. The problem is that Darwin's Game is also a show that has run out of ideas, and so it relies on tropes a lot.
What I like to do sometimes is walk you guys through what exactly it is that is going through my mind as I watch the show. And Darwin's Game, even though I first saw it at the beginning of the year with Raghava, the experience of watching the first episode of Darwin's Game is seared into my mind even now. We start inside the game, right? There's an unknown. You start in medias res with a young man who's trying to escape what seems to be
who seems to be a murderer in a panda suit.
Mm-hmm. The panda has the power to disappear and come back, and it's not like our temporary protagonist doesn't have powers. He's pretty strong too himself, but this panda just seems invincible, and he's charging at him with the knife. and he calls for help on his phone with this app called Darwin's Game to our real protagonist, Kaname Sudo, right before he gets just eliminated by this panda. Usually starting with like a kind of chaotic, violent first episode is like, I mean, first scene, my bad, is it can be sort of lazy, but this one does grab your attention for the time being. It's not like original, but it is like, yeah, okay. It's serviceable. Then later, like I said, we're introduced to Kaname Sudo, and he's talking about how his friend sent him like a weird link to a mysterious app. Then one of their other friends, Hamada, comes in and he's like, Kaname, my dude, my pal, don't download the app, don't click the link, and he's like, what? I want to click the link.
Kaname talks at the start about how he wants a new bike, and he notes that both of his friends, Hamada, who says, don't download the Darwin's Game app, and his other friend, who just died, we know, recently bought a new bike with money, and he asks if it was from a part-time job. Mm-hmm. This is the first indication that Darwin's Game is maybe going to do something interesting, because it talks, and as we learn later, winning or being good at Darwin's Game earns you real-world money.
Right.
Also, as we learn, is that there are other characters who have joined Darwin's Game for the money. And if you think about it, it is the first of Darwin's Game's, I'm going to call, criticisms of capitalism.
Those are strong words.
But when Darwin's Game is good, that is what it is. Mm-hmm. It is talking about how, under capitalism, joining a death game to earn some extra cash is kind of what you have to do.
Or capitalism creates the conditions under which average, everyday people think that it's rational to join an incredibly dangerous, incredibly exhilarating death game if it means being able to pay medical bills, being able to pay housing, or like higher needs, like being able to buy the things that you want to buy and fund the projects or fund the dreams that you want to fund.
Right. And I think it comes to one of our first disappointments with Darwin's Game is that in spite of introducing such an interesting high concept idea, it then goes to Kaname, why not? And he hits the button like an idiot when the framing of the show doesn't quite work.
Yeah. Kaname clicking the app because he was under the impression that it could like make him money would immediately tie these two scenes together. I want a part-time job. I want to get a new bike. And, oh, hey, look, an app that does this. But the show, it seems to not realize this question is there. So it has Kaname kind of act thoughtlessly for much of the episode just to move the plot along. He's told several times, don't join the app. When you join the app, make sure to talk to me. Make sure you don't do anything with the app yet until I tell you this or that. And he just steamrolls past all of that. The app has like a holographic magic snake thing that gives him a sigil. Or I guess how the dub pronounce it is sigil.
There's a scene with him in the hospital that we're going to forget, and then, or rather, we're going to brush by it because it's not super relevant. And then we get to the next interesting segment is when Kaname is on the train, mm-hmm. and the guy with the panda costume from before, BANDA, the mascot, comes in.
The sports mascot BANDA.
And is holding a knife, and there's this really funny scene, and it's 100% not on purpose, where BANDA walks right up to Kaname holding a knife, and Kaname's like, hey, what's up? And BANDA attacks him with a knife.
He's like, whoa, you almost hit me.
And then he jumps out of the train, and there's a great line. called I Guess Banda Kills People Now.
Right. He's like running away, running through the train station. And like there's this dude in a panda costume with a knife running. And people are like, ooh, is this local sports team having a sponsored event?
This is not really related to the political themes of Darwin's Game, but it is very funny.
It is our personal meme. Should we have a Banda emote? I'm pretty sure we should have a Banda emote in the Discord.
Yeah. So one thing I want to comment on is one thing we want to do here as a part of Critical Weeb Theory is not pretend that shows are any greater than they are. I'm not going to act like the guy in a panda costume is a metaphor for the bourgeoisie. Because it's not. It's just a guy in a panda costume. And it is, like, seriously intimidating for a while.
Mm-hmm. But in later episodes, don't they just admit, yeah, that guy was kind of a weirdo. He just dressed up in a panda costume because he likes it.
Yeah.
No one else is like this in Darwin's Game.
Everyone else is like this in Darwin's Game. What are you talking about?
Exactly.
Anyway, there's a bit of a chase scene. Kaname Suda's friend Hamada, that's the guy.
Yeah, he gets involved and he tries to protect Kaname, who's like a newbie, from a stabby stab Banda guy. And along the way, Kaname learns that Darwin's Game is essentially a game in which people can challenge each other to death matches. And either the person who is challenged lets the timer run out, or one of the two people surrender, or somebody needs to kill someone else in order for the game to end.
Well, Kaname doesn't know that surrender is an option yet.
Right, quite yet.
And so there's a chase sequence that ends with Banda getting hit by a car.
Mm-hmm.
Which is also interesting, if only because it's hilarious.
Right, it's hard to describe, but the tension, the tension of this fight is actually pretty well done, because Kaname is like learning everything he can about this game on the fly. His phone is basically disabled while the game is around. His friend is like bleeding because he got stabbed, and there's like all this sort of like high tension stuff. And then while the panda is like invisible, they're like in a parking garage, like another car comes in and just smacks the dude. I'm not even sure you would be driving that fast in a parking garage, but just Banda just goes flying. And since he's invisible, all the normal people who are like not part of Darwin's Game, they're like, whoa, did you hit something? I don't know. And they just kind of like drive away. I've yet to really see Car Ex Machina deployed in anime, but here we are.
As Banda dies, there's a really cool monologue in which he starts laughing maniacally, and he's like, this was way better than doing my dead-end job. In a sense, the exhilarating rush of murder provided an outlet that wasn't there by late-stage capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
It's also worth noting that during this entire chase scene, Kaname sends out a message to this other player, Shuka, or rather, this other player, Shuka, messages him, and he asks for help, and she sort of refuses him.
Right. She's, it turns out she's waiting to see who will win the fight against Banda, and, because of Car Ex Machina, Kaname Sudo does win the fight. And so she's like, oh, interesting. Wiggles eyebrows suggestively.
There's another great scene following this where Kaname returns to his apartment and realizes that Darwin's Game has a gacha function.
Mm-hmm.
And he hits the button on the gacha function and it delivers a gun to him. And he opens it up and he's like, I hate this game.
He's like, a gun. I hate this game.
But again, this is another example of why Darwin's Game Episode 1 is the best episode of Darwin's Game, because it's literally using the predatory monetization of gacha games
right,
to fuel a deathmatch. And if Darwin's Game was this show more often, by which I mean, if it was this show ever again after episode 1, it might actually have been good.
Alas, that is not the timeline. That is not the timeline in which we live.
So then we move on to Kaname reaches out to the girl who messaged him earlier, Shuka, and she asks him to meet at an abandoned warehouse. And Kaname is at first justifiably suspicious because he's sort of got an understanding of Darwin's Game and is like, well, I don't want to die. But then he realizes that he needs knowledge more than he's willing to risk his safety for knowledge. And this creates one of many interesting tensions where Kaname is like, do I trust Shuka? I guess I have to.
Right. What would make this meeting a lot better is if we understood what Shuka had to gain from meeting Kaname. We're kind of told that she's interested in him, but she's really, really strong herself and doesn't really seem like the type of person who wants or needs teammates. It kind of feels like we dragged Shuka into the story because we needed like a heroine, right? Like a female lead. And that gets more clear in just a sec. But for the time being, they meet, and Shuka asks Kaname what his sigil is. Now, as we sort of got introduced to them a little bit before, but everyone who downloads Darwin's Game gets bit, and when they get bitten, they get all sorts of weird and different powers.
Yeah, and Kaname. Well, okay, I want to start talking about the meeting with Shuka again, because what I want to highlight about the meeting with Shuka is this idea of trust that occasionally comes up in Darwin's Game. And what's going on is Shuka doesn't trust Kaname. And Kaname tries to earn her trust, only for it to be revealed that he has a weapon on him.
Kaname doesn't really understand what his sigil is, and for some reason, unknown to him at the time, the app won't tell him what his sigil is. She's like, well, if you can't tell me what your sigil is, I guess I have to kill you. And then there's this whole other fight scene. She's like Spider-Manning with like these two big metal chains around the room trying to kill him. It's a pretty well-directed fight scene, and he's like desperately trying to figure out what his sigil is so that he can find a way to beat this very strong, seemingly very upset adversary.
And then it turns out that his sigil is just a ripoff of Shiro Emiya from Fate.
He can make weapons. How come he can make pens? Okay, this doesn't make sense. Okay, so earlier in the episode, in the nurse scene that we kind of glossed over, we're kind of led to believe that Kaname's powers are duplication because he accidentally makes a second. He needs to sign a form to get released from the nurse, and when he can't find the pen, he accidentally makes a second pen, right? But then later we learn that his sigil is crafting weapons, right? Like forging them. Is a pen a weapon? I know when I was in school and I was like a little kid, the school handbook said a pen could be a weapon if you poked someone with it. But I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure school guidelines are exactly what we think of when we think about how powers work. It's weird. It's like, okay, imagine you have like a photo that you took and you print it out, right, on one hand. And then you order a really nice frame from Amazon on the other hand, right? And so you have a photo and you have like a frame, and it's like, are you gonna put the photo in the frame? But then you just use duct tape to like duct tape the photo onto the wall, and you throw the frame in the trash. And you're like, why? That's what Darwin's Game feels like comfortable. Not comfortably. What it feels like all the time. You have one piece that could be solid. You have another piece that could be solid. There's a really obvious way to connect these two pieces to make something good. And then it just kind of, no, it refuses. There's a really cool fight, and at the end, he, like, kind of jumps her, and, like, the music swells, and it's like, I'm pretty sure the composer for this show also did the music for Fire Force. So if you're into that soundtrack, it's really solid.
Shuka basically says, there's no way out of Darwin's game but to kill me. To which Kaname says, no, that's bullshit. And she insists a lot that this is exactly what's happened. This is exactly what's going on. But then it turns out, after all of what Darwin's game says about the rules of Darwin's game, that those are actually false. That it turns out that there was no need to kill other people at all, and that, in fact, you can just agree to cooperate and peacefully surrender to each other.
That's a key idea behind Darwin's game. It's the closest thing that Darwin's game has to an idea that it follows up on consistently. It's this idea that if people are killing each other in Darwin's game, it's because the people who watch Darwin's game like to see people kill each other, and we'll get to that.
Or the participants of Darwin's game have yet to realize that there is an alternative.
Right, that's the key. I think I was about to say they choose to kill each other, but that's not. It's a choice in which the other option has kind of been obscured by, like, context.
And this is something that comes up later, in which the show's best character, Plant Guy. Yeah, Hiragi Ichiro.
He's introduced a couple episodes into the show, and essentially his deal is that he has a niece who has a terminal illness, and he joins Darwin's game to pay off the medical bills for her illness. And because of that, and because he cares a lot about her niece, he feels as though the only way to survive Darwin's game, such that he can, keep his niece alive, is to kill people. So when he meets Kaname, there's a little bit of that tension, as they both, like, naturally distrust each other. But then over time, he kind of learns and realizes that it was much more effective for him to work with other people, and much more effective to not kill people, but, like, solve the tasks of Darwin's game, than it was doing what he did. This is, like, an incredibly, incredibly powerful character with a very cool power set. He can basically surround himself with, like, plants and leaves, and he, like, fights with them. It's a very cool character who does not survive.
It's a damn shame, because as Plant Guy is introduced, we understand that he's misguided and he's misled, and he's really interesting, and you hope that he comes back and is a consistent presence in the show, because he's incredibly compelling. And then he dies. After Shuka and Kaname both sort of come to an accord, and they sort of decide, hey, let's not kill each other.
Kaname passes out, right?
Yeah, Kaname is the one who passes out. Shuka says, all right, I'll obey you.
That was kind of yikes. She says, I'll do whatever you say.
Everyone is taken out of this scene, where these two are having like a mutual trust moment, and they are immediately made to realize that everything is terrible about this show.
Right, like, we immediately went from, hey, let's trust each other and work together, to, I'm a girl, so I guess I'll do whatever you say. And before you say, is that not an exaggeration, Mo? Are you not projecting your political biases onto a show? No. No. That's what she says. After that scene, it's really bad. When they wake up, like, Kaname is, like, in bed, and, like, Shuka's, like, on top of her and naked for no reason whatsoever. And then she's like, Kaname, can you start a family with me?
And it's terrible. And it is
so awful.
But another example of Darwin's game being like, oh, Hold on, weren't you about to do something interesting there and make a bigger meta commentary on the nature of what it means to cooperate?
Trad waifu. Trad waifu. It's always been trad waifu. It will always be trad waifu. We will only have trad waifu. That's the... I think the worst part, episode 2, which I think that's the worst episode of Darwin's Game, because it undoes fucking everything that you thought you liked about episode 1. But episode 2 starts out with Kaname, why are you naked? And then Shuka's like, well, I was tired and too lazy to put on pajamas. The thing about her starting a family was really about her starting like a guild, so that was just like trad waifu bait. And then she says, the man should take the lead on things, which is please stop. And then they go to the mall where she like picks out dresses and like does her makeup and shit. And it's like, hey, did you know that Shuka, like the character that you see, like in a dress with like pigtails, like that character? Yeah. Did you know she's a girl? Holy shit, guys. She's a girl. She's doing girly things. She's taking too long at the mall. This is what it means to be female. If you watch the show, you'll basically see that there's like 2 Shukas, right? There's a Shuka that's interesting. Like the one that like wants to get revenge for her family through Darwin's Game. The one who just wants like a place to belong.
Who wants to be able to trust people because she has serious fucking trust issues.
There's that one who you want to see. And there's also like trad waifu. Like the girl who you've seen in every other anime who's just there to be pretty and to support the man and kind of make it feel like this is what it's supposed to be like to be married, right? And trad waifu has nothing to do with the character that is described on screen textually. Trad waifu only exists because Shuka was written from like an essentialist point of view, like as if because she is a female lead, she must have trad waifu scenes. And the idea that you can like write a male lead and a female lead without these kinds of interactions seems to entirely have left the conversation when we talk about Darwin's Game.
It is a problem Darwin's Game has that continues to be a problem for the entire show. So Darwin's Game is a bad show. Why are we talking about Darwin's Game?
We've both said, you've heard Raghava say, that Darwin's Game's main problem is that it runs out of ideas really early. And that's kind of an extension of the real point that we want to drive home, which is that reactionaries can't write good stories. And that seems like a strong, almost divorced take from like reality. But it's true, and it's true in Darwin's Game, in the sense that when you write things that are reactionary, you write things entirely from 2 mindsets. First, a hyper-individualist mindset. It's a mindset in which, at worst, the only thing that matters is the main central character. And because of this, every other character kind of warps and bends to fit the needs of the main character. Because in a reactionary worldview, in an individualist worldview, you are the main character of your own story, right? Groups don't exist. Society doesn't exist. It's you and the people around you who are useful to you because they bring some benefit to you and you bring some benefit to them, and that's why you're friends. Interacting on a stage where you want what's best for yourself, everyone and everything else be down. And so when you write like that, you'll notice that like stuff is just like missing from the world, right? Like key details, key ideas, key things that would make watching or reading or experiencing the story interesting just gone because of the worldview of the writing. The second thing about it is that reactionary writing, it's a bit contradictory. People are atomized into individuals, but all these individuals fit some archetype or other and must follow that archetype. You'll hear some of, like, even in the YouTube space, some of the people who go on about objectively good and objectively bad stories, and they talk about how, like, the hero's journey is like an objectively good framework in which if you follow the hero's journey correctly, you write a good show. And if you do not follow the hero's journey, then you write a bad show.
Just to real quick talk about that, any ideas of objective good or objective evil, like the hero's journey, or alternatively this idea of white Western music theory, are fundamentally white supremacist in nature, because they take a pattern that exists in some work, they assert that it's good, and they work backwards from there. This is a sort of problem with any sort of anti-materialist way of thinking, because you start from the conclusion that the hero's journey is the way in which stories are written, and then you work backwards and you start judging shows or stories based on how closely they ascribe to the hero's journey. And then you arrive at the conclusion that anything that doesn't follow the hero's journey is wrong. And an example I would give is this idea of, say you wanted to talk about the best animal, and your favorite animal was a cat. And so you're like, okay, my best animal categories are, it has 4 legs, fur, small enough to fit in my lap, whiskers, related to lions, but not a lion, right? Those are your categories for deciding what the best animals are. Obviously, if you use that framework or standard of thinking, then you're going to find out that, oh, wait,
only cats are objectively
what
good.
A surprise. It turns out that the cat was the best animal. I used my objective criteria to determine that cats were the best animal. You might say, well, what does that have to do with Darwin's game? Well, consider what the expectations are for what a good anime is. Consider how much of an expectation there is to have a waifu.
To have a dominant kind of male lead who, like, takes charge and is like above the other character.
And as we find out from, or like this idea of a tsundere is oftentimes people's top waifu. Every time. And it is when we start interrogating, why are these standards in place? Why is Shuka a tsundere, right? Why did she have to fall for Kaname? And when you start thinking about it a lot, right? The story starts to make a lot more sense if Shuka actually dislikes Kaname, or is at the very least wary of him for a while. And the story works better if he earns her trust, and like,
because her story is about learning to trust people.
And so you have a character like that, and then why was it decided that she should like the protagonist? Well, it wasn't a conscious decision. It was working from the same sort of abstract framework that a lot of other shows work from.
That a good anime is an anime in which the cute female lead falls in love with the male. And it's like, it's really evident in shows like Darwin's Game that would be much, much better if they just didn't do that. The ultimate thing about reactionary writing is that because every individual must follow an archetype, and every story must follow an archetype of what a good story is. A lot of times you'll like write people and write situations that are interesting and good, and they'll just be like crammed into some box that we've seen before. Like they'll be hammered with a hammer that only works in specific situations, if any.
The other thing to note about Darwin's Game is that Darwin's Game is sort of a manifestation of capitalist realism. Darwin's Game is a show that understands the flaws of capitalism. If it didn't understand the flaws of capitalism, it wouldn't talk about the ways in which poverty and a lack of finances pressure people into making decisions they otherwise wouldn't. It wouldn't talk about how cooperation is better than competition if it didn't understand that competing with each other is not the right way and is not the most efficient way to guarantee a healthy and happy life. But where Darwin's Game sort of falls apart is that it doesn't really consider that there might be another way, because it falls into the trap of reproducing the same sort of problems that it already had.
Yeah, it's on you have on the one hand a lot of these little tidbits and a lot of these little scenes that are like really compelling, and they like get not just at the core of like why capitalism is bad, but just more generally at the core of why life can be like frustrating for a lot of average everyday people. But then because it doesn't have the insight to criticize systems and to criticize like the fundamental relationships between people, it falls flat on its own promises a lot. That thing I said about the frame and the picture is not just with Kaname's powers, it's also about like the thematic underpinnings of the show. There's a critique that Raghava and I often get when we try to bring leftist analysis to various shows, various media, and it's that SJWs, leftists, whatever you want to call it, they don't care about the show being good or bad. They just care about the show agreeing with our politics. I mainly hear this from the right, like active, like militant right-wingers in media spaces, but I also hear this quite a bit from the left as well. It's not necessary to name names and start drama, but there is definitely like a contingent of the left that thinks that the only thing that matters in life is reading capitalist realism and reading Capital like 500 times, and then, I don't know, saying that you should organize and then not actually organizing, just telling other people that you're smarter than them because you organize. To those people, I have to say, Darwin's Game kind of shows you how both, like, I guess you want to say the quality, like the subjective quality of a show, and how the political criticism of the show are intertwined, in that when you are aware of like systems in your stories, and when you are aware of like the ideological tint of your stories, you're able to write better stories, more enjoyable stories, more meaningful stories, because there's an entire dimension of storytelling that you just get, and there's an entire dimension that you can use to communicate with people, not just like politically, but like emotionally, spiritually. And that's kind of, if there's one thing that this podcast can kind of like communicate, ironically, I think it's that. It's like not just when we say everything is political, it's not just every show is political, but like our lives are political, the way we interact with each other are political. And the political is also personal.
You cannot meaningfully talk about the way in which Darwin's Game falls apart, the way in which its over-reliance on pre-existing tropes kneecaps the narrative, or perhaps even more obviously, the way in which its sexism operates without also talking about its politics. Because the way in which the reason its sexism is there is because of the fact that it is expected that any female character in a show must like the main male protagonist.
I guess the bottom line is that, and I think something that shouldn't be too surprising, is that if you write a sexist story, right, one in which all the women are like one-dimensional, like sexualized objects, what you've done is you've made a large part of your cast one-dimensional, boring tropes that nobody wants to watch. And if you write a feminist story, one in which women and, you know, anyone of any kind of sexual and gender orientation, like, are able to be whole ass people with stuff going on, you've written a whole ass story with interesting things that are happening that, even if you want to enjoy things from a non-political dimension, still shine through from that angle. The last thing I wanted to bring up in relation to Darwin's Game is something that I think will show up in future episodes. And it's an idea that I've kind of taken to calling anime individualism. I think this is a temporary name until I do a little bit more research about like the development of like political ideology in Japan and like how that may or may not affect this idea. But for now, it's just called anime individualism because it's a kind of individualism that I've seen in a lot of shows. And essentially, how anime individualism works, it's this idea that we are vaguely aware that systems in power are failing. They're either failing, they're corrupt, they hurt people, but we don't do class analysis and we don't do any like left-wing analysis whatsoever. We just kind of know that governments are corrupt, businesses are corrupt, organized religion can be corrupt, societies can be corrupt, and stuff like that. And so we kind of look at all these things. What do governments, businesses, organized religion, and societies all have in common? Well, they're all collectives. They're all made up of more than one person, right? And so then we kind of come to the conclusion that groups of people are bad and that individuals are good, in which the only way to beat corruption is to atomize society to the point in which everyone just has themselves, like a close group of people that they take care of, and everyone just kind of does what's best for them. And then in the end, it'll work out because everyone is just doing what's best for themselves. The most stark example of this is in The Rising of the Shield Hero. Long story. I do have essays on that if you're interested, but essentially it's a show about a slave owner that kind of runs around being persecuted by the church, and he has these two slaves who we're told he loves and wants to protect. And he's like been summoned to another world in a RPG video game inspired world. It's an isekai, you know. And so how the show treats the protagonist, Naofumi, is essentially he is entirely self-interested. And because he is self-interested, whenever he helps others, he ends up helping people more by being self-interested than his peers who help people out of solidarity. So, real quickly, he shows up to a starving village and he uses his powers to make a plant that can solve hunger, basically, because it grows very fast and it can be harvested very fast. But because the village is poor and it can't afford the rate that he wants to sell it to them, he sells them to rich merchants instead. And we're told that because he sold it to rich merchants, the merchants are able to, in and of themselves, do what's best for themselves and then proliferate the food where it needs to be, right? Or, for example, on the reverse, some of his other friends, they go, for example, they topple a king because they want to free people from oppression. But because they did that selflessly, now an even worse dictator is in power overseas because they didn't do it in a way that benefits themselves.
Just a real quick comment. This is in contrast to the way things happen to work in the real world, where people tend to coup democratically elected socialists out of self-interest, and that's what results in the worst, crueler dictator being installed.
Exactly. Like, anime individualism is kind of incapable of understanding why things happen in real life. Another softer example of this is also in Fire Force. Fire Force is kind of ideologically messy. But in Fire Force, there are companies that are corrupt. The Empire is corrupt. The Fire Force individual, like the firefighting brigades, are all corrupt. The only people who are not corrupt are like the main character, his friends, some other people who work as individuals to just understand the truth by themselves and beat corruption by themselves. And the problem with anime individualism is the same problem with I don't want to call out any egoists in the audience, but the problem with most individualism is that because you focus entirely on individuals, you are unable to fix the problems that got us here in the first place, right? If we didn't fix like capitalism, if we didn't fix the state, we didn't fix any of the problems that were wrong with society, and we just said, as long as people take care of themselves, there can be no corruption because there are no groups. Well, then just the most powerful people will go back to doing all of the things that they do now, right? There's no such thing. Collectives, we need to band together to like beat other people. And finally, coming back to Darwin's game, it's the same kind of ideology that I think tints a little bit the show. Mm-hmm. There's still this idea that we can't, that groups are not even groups are the thing, but like I'm talking about like larger groups are like not quite the thing that we should be focusing on, and we should instead focus on like personal relationships and like doing what's best for the people close to us. And that kind of that seems like an ideologically neutral stance, but it's like not when you take it into context of like material analysis.
I think that's as good a time as any to segue into talking about the seasonal anime that we have been watching right now.
Unlike our Darwin's Game segment, this is going to be mostly spoiler free, so don't worry too much about it. But if you're really just out of context, I'm going to tell them that you can skip to the end if you don't want any knowledge at all about anything. Okay. So unlike our Darwin's Game segment, this is going to be relatively spoiler free. However, if you don't want to know anything at all about any of the fall 2020 anime, I would just skip to the time code here. So, anime number 1, I have anime number 0. I have more anime that I'm keeping track of this season than last season. But the frustrating thing is there are less good anime this season than last season. And that's kind of, I don't know what I'm going to do about it. I think I might just have to like drop things. So anime number 1 is Hypnosis Mic Division Rap Battle. The setting for this show is some of the technical term here is the wildest fucking shit I've ever seen. Right? We have after the peak of anime settings, after a world war, there is an all-female fascist party called the Party of Words that announces a coup d'etat on the country of Japan. And then it says, we are destroying all weapons and we are replacing them with microphones that have various adverse effects to them. And then it ethnostates the men. As in, no, it doesn't ethnostate the men. It apartheids the men. Sorry for technical terms here. But it apartheids the men, in which they all just live in like these ghettos in the cities, and various gangs of like mic-armed men fight each other for like control and dominance in these divisions. That's why they're called Division Rap Battle. And the fascist party picks out the best rappers from all of the divisions to compete in a rap battle tournament. The songs are really good. That's the thing. The entire show, when you watch it, you kind of realize that it doesn't want you to pay attention to any of that. It just wants you to pay attention to like how cute all the boys are and how like cool all the songs are. And the boys are cute. And the songs are good. So you're just kind of sitting there being like, what is this? Why was it made? Why am I here? Yeah, it's one of those, as Raghava was saying, like, in which the politics of the show kind of affect, I think, the quality of it a little bit, in that if the show didn't have all this weird and distracting, like, like gender essentialist nonsense going on around it, in which we kind of say that like men are inherently violent and like if women were like in charge and kept all the oppressive systems of power, but just like made men less inherently violent, the world would be a better place. If it didn't have all of that, it would just be like a fun and like, I think, fun but like strange concept. But like having that in every once in a while, I think kind of distracts the show from what it wants to be.
Well, it does a couple things. One, imagine how much better the show would be if women were rapping in the show. Two,
epic.
Imagine how much better the show would be if we talked about trans people at all. Like, it's not strictly necessary, but imagine what the show is already saying about trans people and non-binary people, right? People who don't conform to their expected genders. And maybe it'll do something. But third, and I think more interesting, is unless the show actively goes for a fascist coup, imagine how easy it is to just subtly create an acceptance of an authoritarian state if it looks nice. And this is a lot of the way in which real authoritarian states take power. And yes, Raghava is the no fun. You can't enjoy anything except on not really. You can enjoy Hypnosis Mike just fine. I quite like it. But
it's very fun.
It's still important to acknowledge these sort of political implications from it, like political implications that really didn't need to be there, and that if they weren't there, would improve other parts of the show, because they are a part of what is, in a sense, holding the show back.
Hypnosis Mike apparently has like an underground meme and enthusiast community, and to be honest, I'm pretty happy for the Hypnosis Mike fans. I've seen some of like the vines and shit on YouTube, and I'm just like, okay, y'all do you. I think if anything else, it's one of the most interesting. I can't even say if the show's good or bad, but just one of the most interesting experiences. I would, even if you think it's not for you, I would recommend just watching the first episode, just so that you can say, I've watched an episode of Hypnosis Mike. You'll get like a little badge. We'll get a little award. We'll ship it to you in the mail. I want to be a little bit careful with how we word this, just because like Japan in and of itself does have its like own hip hop subculture that like has its own history. And we should respect that. However, like one was definitely like affected by the other. Right. And so it is a little bit jarring, I think, to see like a lot of signifiers that would be usually ascribed to like Black culture and like Black resistance to the state and capital.
I would even say like that would be ascribed to anti-authoritarianism.
Used in service of authoritarianism.
Yeah. Like, there's a really weird relationship going on.
But we will never get to it. We'll just have the cute boys rapping.
Right, and again, this is an instance of an anime refusing to... if it continues to refuse to talk about its political undertones, this will sort of be, like, the natural byproduct of that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that like those political undertones won't really get a second examination.
All right.
On to the next one. I'm going to talk about Talentless Nana.
Speaking of fascism,
I have very little nice to say about Talentless Nana. The first episode is boring for 20 minutes, and then there is a twist that could maybe be interesting, and then the second episode is fascist.
Very fascist.
Now, I have read the entire manga, and it does eventually stop doing a fascism. That being said, just because when I read the manga I was so happy that it stops doing a fascism that I was almost convinced the manga was good for a moment, doesn't mean the anime too will be good, or that the manga was good at all. The most I have nice to say about the manga is that when it stops doing a fascism, it actually brings up some compelling points. But it doesn't stop doing a fascism anytime soon. The anime will probably just be fascist the entire time, and it's boring, and it's lazily written, and I would like to move on.
I don't have anything to add to that.
Alright, on to the next one, which is Burn the Witch by Taite Kubo.
I don't think you still haven't seen it, right?
I still haven't seen it, but you can talk about it.
So Burn the Witch, while we're on, I guess, the theme of how politics affects writing, Burn the Witch is a show that has a lot of like political potential in it, but then it does nothing with it. Like, okay, there are, for example,
Nothing yet. Taite Kubo, my fucking man.
We believe in you. For example, again, this is mostly spoiler free. The setting in which all these characters are in is basically like a reverse version of London, where magic is everywhere, and there are all these dragons that need to be controlled and tamed for the good of humanity. And the setting is basically a corporatocracy, in which there is a massive corporation that also whose board of directors also acts like a government and also decides where citizens go, what they can, how freely they can express themselves, whether or not they live or die. They can just send out execution orders to whoever they want. There is a member of the board who is just a Nazi. Like, she has like the SS symbol on her. She just like exists as a Nazi. There's a lot of question about like the various like different types of people and how they like relate to the dragons, and there's also a whole relationship between the two main characters. One of them is very interested in like climbing, I guess, what would be considered the corporate ladder in her dragon catching profession, and the other one is much more laid back, much more just wants to survive and be with the people she cares about. And so like all of that is there, but it focuses on none of that. It does deliver a very tight, very compelling story in which you like all of the characters, but none of the ideas that could have been really interesting are. It's surprisingly apolitical for a show that has so much politics in it.
I want to move from talking about Burn the Witch to talking about another show that is really interesting, but sort of falls a bit flat because it doesn't talk about its politics. Bleach. Bleach is by the same person who made Burn the Witch, Taite Kubo. So let's start. Bleach is about soul eaters, and the first major arc of Bleach is when the main protagonist's friend, Rukia, is taken by the Soul Society, and she's going to be executed for no fault of her own. And a lot of the beginning of the show is about coping with that. And it's really interesting to see the political implications, where it turns out at the end of it that fighting the Soul Society, that like countering what the Soul Society is trying to do, was not only good but necessary, because the problem with the rigidly hierarchical society is that any bad actor can subvert it and take control of it. That's what happens. And it's really interesting to see Bleach do that.
Right.
And then it just never does it again. I'm like, Bleach, come on.
Please, you were... It definitely does seem... Burn the Witch, it kind of only exists... This is kind of a mean thing to say, but it kind of only exists because it's announcing... I'm not sure, because I haven't read or watched Bleach, but it's like announcing like the next Bleach. And so Taite Kubo, he was given kind of free reign to like write whatever story he wanted, as like a, hey guys, while we're getting Bleach ready, check out this other story, sort of thing. And like even like a lot of the advertisement of Burn the Witch also references Bleach. So if you liked, I guess, the feel of Bleach, but you were maybe like, the actual writing or storytelling doesn't really work out, Same author, same sort of general vibe, same kind of spirit, but just I think with a lot more experience, and I think a character and setting that people will really fall in love with.
We can trash Our Last Crusade. It's just politically terrible and also narratively terrible. See, these two are basically hand in hand all the time.
Yeah, it's Our Last Crusade is a science fantasy romance that takes place in some faraway land where the Empire, which is a technologically advanced superpower, wants to hunt down and kill witches who are a magically inclined racial minority, and then there's another country filled with the witches who are, I guess, fighting a war for self-determination, and then the repression of witches everywhere. And on both sides of the battlefield, a very talented commander who is definitely not just Kirito from Sword Art Online. Nope. No, ignore the black hair. Ignore the dual swords. He's not Kirito. He meets up with a very beautiful woman from the witch's side, and they instantly fall in love in the most cliche, trite, trope-ridden, garbage way possible. None of the characters are interesting or good. There's fan service, but like the kind of fan service where it's like this character exists for fan service. There's just, it kind of feels like we have like a special setting to be special, but then all the pieces are just like widgets, like cogs in the machine that is the standard romance anime plotline. It is so unbelievably exhausting.
Our Last Crusade and the Flaws of Centrism, where it turns out that both the fascist empire, who is trying to kill all the witches, and the witches who also kill some of the fascist imperials, are both bad, it turns out.
Yeah, they're both equally responsible for the war because they're both being too emotional about it, and they can't rationally realize that they need to stop. Both sides need to stop the fighting.
Our Last Crusade is bad, folks.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of like nonsense reactionaries when they talk about Israel-Palestine, and they're like, both sides need to stop. There's just so much anger on both sides, where it's like one side basically apartheids the other, and one side constantly attacks, dehumanizes, belittles, kills, dehouses the other side, and the other side is pissed about that, and you try to say that these things are real. It's just,
one side has the backing of the US government and the other side does not, but it turns out the violence inflicted by both sides are somehow comparable?
I suppose so.
No.
We do not suppose that at all.
No. On to the next one. My favorite. Fucking Taiso Samurai.
Yes. This show.
Taiso Samurai.
Just the idea. The idea that Mal apparently has this show at a 6.74 is a fucking, it's a war crime. Okay, listen. It's counter-revolutionary behavior. No, I'm kidding. But seriously, Taiso Samurai is amazingly funny and witty show. It's about a gymnast who's kind of had an injury and he's a little old. He isn't really as good as he used to be, and his days are kind of numbered. And his wife passed away recently, and he has a daughter who he loves very much. And on a trip where he was wanted to spend time with his daughter, he meets a samurai who is avoiding deportation by the Japanese government. And the tone of the show is just incredibly lighthearted, incredibly funny. All the characters feel real, but they're also like exaggerated enough so that you just like have a good time. You watch the show and you just kind of want to smile because you're just having so much fun. On the one hand, I think it's a little bit difficult to tell because the show doesn't really get into like anything too political. But on the other hand, what I will say is that
Does it?
yeah, it doesn't, but doesn't it? In the sense that it refuses to be boxed in the kind of tropes that you would expect. Like, for example, there's a child's character, and you love her because she acts like an actual child. Like, or rather, she acts
I
like...
was even going to say that it talks about deportation.
Oh, yes.
Which, like, what?
I think we'll have to see.
Apolitical.
I think what I meant by that is that we still have to see where the show takes that sort of arc. But yeah.
But even then, like, that's interesting because of what it is.
All of the characters
what
are...
else is...
I think the audacity, I think, in this day and age where a lot of shows are basically just about high schoolers and freshmen in college, to have, like, a grown adult with a career and a child as our protagonist is really refreshing. To have...
It's like Tiger and Bunny. The show just does a lot, and it is holistically good. And finally, Jujutsu Kaisen.
Just another solid show. I am glad that we're...
Animation is so good, and it was such a breath of fresh air to watch Jujutsu Kaisen after watching Talentless Nana.
Oh, yeah.
And just, like, the dull, boring animation of Talentless Nana, and going into something like Jujutsu Kaisen, which has so much life in it.
This is something that I say a lot to Raghava, but, like, sometimes when I, like, wade through, like, garbage anime, I sort of get complacent. I kind of start thinking, well, you know, it's not good, but, like, isn't it, like, sort of not the worst thing? Maybe this and that, blah, blah, blah. And then you just watch something that's, like, good, and you're like, oh, I don't have to put up with that bullshit. Wait. No.
Jujutsu Kaisen does a really interesting thing in the second episode, which I really like, where it encourages the protagonist to find his own resolve rather than just going along with others. And to bring it back to politics, it's a problem I see a lot in, like, leftist spaces where, and it's like, oh, well, we just need to prescribe it to everyone, and everyone just needs to, like, believe this. But at that point, you've fallen into dogmatism.
Right.
And you've moved away from scientific materialism, which is the basis of leftist theory, where we're like, oh, we need to actually critically analyze it. You've fallen into dogmatism. And Jujutsu Kaisen actually sort of pushes back against that sort of mentality when in the second episode it says, you know, don't just accept that you have to collect the fingers of Yomen Sukuna because, you know, your dying grandpa told you to. Don't just accept it because that's what you've been told. You have to actually, like, believe yourself. You have to come to that conclusion yourself. You have to do the analysis yourself and come to that conclusion yourself.
Not just to any conclusion, but, like, a conclusion that is, like, meaningful to you and that motivates you.
Yeah. Right, because otherwise, like, what are you standing on? When someone says, why are you fighting? If you don't have that answer, what are you even doing?
Mm-hmm.
What will keep you going? What will hold your resolve when someone challenges your beliefs, challenges your ideas? And I think that's really good.
Ultimately, it's a horror, I would say, but, like,
It's a what?
A horror. Like a horror. Like a horror
anime.
Oh,
okay. I thought you said, like, horror.
Oh.
No. Keep going.
Yeah, it's a horror anime, and I guess not a lot of people notice about me, but, like, horror is, like, not really my thing. However, it's a horror anime with, like, with a light enough and refreshing tone that it's not just grimdark all of the time. It's, like, a really unique and, like, interesting feel that has to the show. And all the characters are, like, really, like, fleshed out and well-rounded, even the ones that we don't see a lot. I think if any of what we said sounds remotely interesting, you should definitely check out Jujutsu Kaisen.
And with that, I think we are at our close.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
So much for listening to this. It has been wild to make not only one, but 2 episodes of a podcast that we said we were going to make.
Amazing.
Like,
we're going strong.
If I can say one thing to all you folks out there, if you have the time and the energy, make the thing you want to make.
Absolutely.
If there is one thing we must tell you here, it is that there is no such thing as an objective good, and if you put your heart into it, and if you do your best to have the story's politics reflect the politics you believe in, it'll be good.
It'll be something that you won't have regret writing.
Yeah, so we here at the Critical Weeb Theory podcast are 100% in favor of more people doing things, more people creating, and if you do happen to make something and you think it's really cool, send it to us in our Discord server.
Yep.
Whose link will be in the description here.
In the comment, it'll be wherever it is you happen to be listening to this, in case someone further in the future is listening to this. The link to the Discord will be somewhere there.
Yeah, and I 100% encourage you to drop a link in our Discord.
Other than that, you can follow us on Twitter.
So with that, I'm Raghava, my pronouns are they, them, and of course, theirs.
Classic. And I'm Mo Black, he, him, his.
Thank you. And we hope to see you again.